Hello there, Sharks. I'm Jonathan Little for PokerNews.com. If you want all the best poker news, check out PokerNews.com. And today, we are reviewing a hand from the $10,000 buy-in tournament on GG Poker that takes place every week. This is a 1 million guaranteed tournament currently, but they usually get way more players than the guarantee requires. And today, we're taking a look at a hand that is played five-handed between Chess Grandmaster, the young phenom, Ottomar Ladva. Hope I didn't mess up your name. I apologize if I did. And Elio Fox. Elio Fox is a long-time poker reg, tournament reg. I played with him a lot recently, actually, at the, what was it called? The Poker Masters, and at the World Series of Poker. He gets in there, he battles. He's a lot of fun to play with. I would generally say that he mixes it up very, very well. Usually plays, good, solid GTO poker, but every once in a while he gets out of line. To be fair, maybe he's just playing good GTO poker, and GTO poker recommends getting out of line every once in a while. But here we are at the final table, taking a look at the chip stacks. Notice, T. Muhlacher, absolute crusher. I think he's final table this tournament 9 times. Does that sound right? Something like that. He is the big stack. Elio is second in chips with a solid 60 big blind stack. And then there are two relatively shallow stacks. Ottomar is one of them with about 20 big blinds. In this scenario, Ottomar definitely needs to be relatively cautious because he doesn't really want to go broke before the other shallow stack. On GG, the payout structure at the final table is relatively flat, which also incentivizes the shallower stacks to really not go broke because there is a decent amount of value in just laddering up one more payout jump. So let's take a look at this hand. Right off the bat, he has pocket eights in the small blind. I think just ripping it all in is probably fine for 20 big blinds. He goes for the limp, though, and I have to imagine he is limping here, planning to limp shove. I definitely think that this is a spot where you want to be tighter than any sort of GTO chart would recommend without payout implications. And, you can go either way between shoving or limp shoving. Either one is fine. You may ask, why not raise? If you raise, you're going to get called a lot, which is not great because Elio here is not really disincentivized to play pots with you because he knows he's not going broke on this hand. And also, if you raise and get jammed on, you got to call it off, but it's actually not a great scenario given the flat payout structure. So this is a spot where I think you either want to looking to limp shove if you think Elio is going to raise very frequently, or you just want to open, rip it all in. Either play is fine. All right, Elio with queen 5 offsuit. You can raise, you can check. Depending on how wide he thinks Ottomar is limping, he may want to use this type of hand as a bluff. That said, checking's fine, especially if you think your opponent is limping with a well-balanced range, including stuff like aces and kings and queens and jacks, all the way down to 8s, apparently. So, as your opponent's limping stronger and stronger hands, you should be more inclined to check. He does check. King 3-2. So now Ottomar is in a spot that is very difficult to play because whenever you are the short stack at a final table, and there is another short stack you're incentivized to outlast, you really, really, really don't want to put your money in a marginal scenario. And on any flop that contains an overcard, if your opponent tries to put their money in, your hand is a bluff catcher. And you don't want to be calling off with bluff catchers in this scenario in general, unless you know your opponent is drastically over bluffing. Now, Elio may be the type of player to drastically over bluff at a final table. As far as I know, I have little to no final table experience with him. Maybe he's a blaster, maybe he's not. But if he is a little bit on the more tame side, then this is just a bad spot for eights right off the bat. Because, if you bet and get called, it's not great. If you check and he bets and you call and he keeps betting the turn the river, it's not great. And this is why I probably would have just shoved pre-flop. That said, I could certainly be convinced that limping and limp jamming is ideal. Anyway, here we have the flop. I think Ottomar can either check or bet small. Either play is reasonable. You're going to find that when you are in this situation where you and one other player both has 20 big blinds, you're just really trying to get to the showdown cheaply. Elio has some showdown value with queen high. He beats all the unpaired hands. So I like a check down with the queen high in this scenario. Turns to 9. Ottomar's giving it some thoughts. I think checking's fine. Betting small's fine. He does go for the small bet. And now, Elio has to figure out what to do with the literal queen high. What would you do with the queen high? Take a second, think about it, pause the video and write in the comment section below what you do with the queen high here. Do you just fold it for the small bet? Do you call? Do you raise small to, let's say, 200K? Or do you pile all the money in? Pause the video and write what you would do in the comment section below. All right, this is a tough spot because you may say queen high is clearly bad, just fold. But we're getting good pot odds and we're in position, and we know Ottomar can't be too insane on the river because he has to fear that Elio just has a good hand, right? So this is a spot where I think folding is actually out of the question. Notice that you do beat a lot of the unpaired hands, and you got to presume Ottomar's probably not going to be betting with stuff like ace-jack on the turn, right? Because he can just easily check it, assuming he did limp ace-jack, which maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. I'm not exactly sure what his pre-flop strategy is. But if he is limping a lot of stuff like 8-7, 8-6, queen 4, like all of these random hands that are just trying to see the flop, a lot of those will be suited, of course, he may feel inclined to try to make a small bet here when it does go check, given he certainly could be limping with a lot of decently strong high cards as well. His range is a little bit muddled in my brain. I'm not exactly sure what he is limping with. So in this scenario, especially if Elio doesn't know what he's limping with, then you kind of have to presume his range is decently wide open. So in this scenario, queen high is actually good a lot of the time. And the nice thing about this is that Elio would always call the 9 on the turn and would very likely call the 9 on the river. And that's going to put Ottomar in a spot where he can't just blindly bluff the turn and the river, right? So I think this is a spot where as long as your range is decently well protected with perhaps some kings and a lot of 9s, I think calling here is very reasonable with the idea that you're just going to fold the river most of the time if your opponent bets. If your opponent checks the river, you can maybe even check it down. Queen high can win sometimes, or you may feel inclined to bluff. But I think folding's out of the question. It would just be a little bit too tight here. I realize queen high is not great, but there are a lot of draws available, and you beat a large chunk of the draws, right? Whenever you have a hand like queen high that just so happens to beat a lot of the draws, you can't really fold getting great odds unless you know your opponent's a weak, tight knit, and I'm going to presume Ottomar is not because he's in there battling in the $10,000 buy-in tournament on GG on a very regular basis. So I like a call. You may say, why not raise? Well, if we raise, the problem with raising is that we're just going to get crushed against a king. A 9 probably won't even fold, and a draw may even rip it all in, which is not great. So I don't think there's any merit in raising in this scenario. Although, look, I have not studied infinite ICM adjusted GTO strategies here. I could certainly be convinced that raising may be fine, but I think you probably want to have some sort of hand with equity, maybe like 6-5 offsuit or something like that to raise, although you may just bet that on the flop. So it's kind of hard to know what draws actually exist in Elio's range. But maybe in this scenario, you do just want to raise with something that has an overcard to the 9. And that might be queen 5. That could be fun. If you're going to raise, you want to go for a smallish raise, though. You definitely don't want to rip it in, because when you rip it in and you're against a strong hand, you're just always getting called. And you're dead. So anyway, I think call's the right answer for the most part. Elio does call. River's a 2. If Ottomar checks, I don't think Elio needs to bluff this one, because he very likely has the best hand with queen high some portion of the time, and he's never going to get Ottomar off of a king or a 9 or 3 even, because there are a lot of draws available. So I think that queen high can just easily check it down if Ottomar checks. The question, though, is, should Ottomar value bet? I think, accounting for ICM implications, this is just a check looking to check call any bet. That's the easy play. I think that is probably the right play, accounting for the fact that, again, he's one of the 2 shallow stacks with 20 big blinds. The tough thing about betting here is that if you bet, first off, are you going to get called by a whole lot of worse hands? I mean, you may get called by ace high here if Elio has it, but ace high is going to jam a lot of ace high preflop or raise in preflop, right? So he doesn't have a ton of ace high. So you're trying to get called by what, a 3? I mean, a 3 may call a small bet, but that's it, right? But the thing is, Elio may bet some 3s on the flop. So you can start to discount the 3s. So what, we're trying to get called by queen high now? Is queen high really going to call a bet on the river? I'm not so sure. It's a weird scenario because you got to realize a lot of people think, preflop range is just really clearly defined in these scenarios, but I'm not exactly sure. Like, is Ottomar limping a lot of ace X, looking to limp jam? I don't know. Is Elio jamming a lot of ace X? I mean, I got to presume he is, but maybe not. Who knows? So I'm just kind of unsure about what each player's range looks like in this scenario. Anyway, though, I think this is an easy check call. If you bet, sometimes you get bluff raise, which would be disaster. And I don't think you're ever going to get a 9 to fold. And I'm not even, a 3 will call, but I don't think you're going to get queen high to call here. And ace high may even fold. So if Elio even has any of those. So I think this is an easy check call. If you are going to bet, you want to go small. This is a spot, though, where I will say, if we are playing with no ICM implications, I think a small bet becomes much more viable. You're going to find, from a GTO point of view, out of position with hands that have like 55-ish% equity against your opponent's range, you often do want to go for a small bet, because when you bet small, you are making a slightly profitable bet. Whereas when you check and your opponent perfectly polarizes their range, which maybe they do, maybe they don't, in that scenario, then you are just trying to break even, right? On average. So would you rather make a tiny bit of money with a hand like ace, or would you rather break even? Well, you'd obviously rather make a tiny bit of money. And I think this is a hand that would normally bet small, but I think accounting for ICM, you probably just want to check, because if you ever get raised, you're gonna have a very difficult time defending with a whole lot of your range in this scenario, if you are small betting with a lot of very marginal made hands. Big bet would be out of the question, I think. I mean, you're never going to get a 9 to fold for any bet size. So unless you're going to like rip it all in, but that would be ridiculous. All right, Ottomar does go for the small bet. And, is queen high going to call? Probably not. So should we fold? Probably. Elio's giving it some thought. Is the hand over? Is the hand over yet? Giving it a lot of thought. Maybe too much thought. Is he going to have devious plans? Boom! I told you, Elio will just randomly get after it. One thing I've seen a lot of the best players in the world do, and Elio is one of the best players in the world, is they will make very aggressive river bluffs in spots where a lot of people think that their opponents are just very rarely bluffing. And this is a spot where Elio correctly realizes, on the river facing this small bet, well, I can't really call. Fine. So we can't really call, because we got to presume Ottomar's not bluffing with air all that often for the small size. Maybe you could call. You do not block flush draws, and you do not block stuff like random Jack 10. Anyway, if we cannot profitably call, should we use this hand as a bluff? So what hands want to bluff? Well, it's an interesting spot, because normally when you're bluffing, it's because you just completely lack showdown value, right? So in this scenario, you really don't want to block various flush draws that are better than your hand, right? So if we're sitting here with, 8-7 of hearts, that would be a particularly bad hand to bluff, because that blocks hands like 10-8 of hearts that would perhaps bluff the river, right? We also, I think, want to block stuff like, the auto calls. You want to block whatever the auto calls are for your opponent. What are the auto calls here? Hands that are never, ever folding. Like a king's not ever going to fold. Does the queen block king, queen? I don't know, because Ottomar may just raise or shove it pre-flop. I'm not sure. Maybe he limps it. I don't know. We want to block, will pocket queens that got tricky call a raise? Funny enough, it probably shouldn't, because a lot of the bluffs here are going to be queen high, jack high, 10 high, right? So funny enough, I think a 9 may be a better call than a hand like queens, jacks, or 10s. It's a weird scenario. I have no clue what the right play is. I'm going to presume Elio is right. One thing I will say, though, is that in scenarios like this where there are two shallow stacks, the big stack in the hand should definitely be very, very aggressive in this spot, raising. And a lot of people do not, and they leave money on the table. What are the best bluffs here? I don't know. Someone run this in a ICM adjusted GTO solver. Let me know what the best bluffs are in this spot. Interesting scenario, though, right? Because, notice you don't really block any 2s, which would be auto calls. I mean, he may be limping queen 2 suited, but probably not 5-2 offsuit. I mean, maybe 5-2 suited limps. So I guess the 5 is relevant. You do block king queen, but I'm not sure king queen limps pre-flop. So I'm not sure this is a great hand to do this with. But I mean, find better hands to do this with. I mean, it's kind of hard to find many of them that make a whole lot of logical sense from a just straight what would be a normal logical bluff. So in scenarios like that where you don't have a whole lot of normal logical bluffs, you start to go with some of these total nonsense bluffs like this. Nonsense bluffs. Hands that just don't make a whole lot of normal, natural logical sense. So yeah, cool spot. Elio does jam. Actually doesn't jam. He raises half of Ottomar's stack. A big raise, by the way. If you are going to raise here, I think you do want to be sure you have a big size, because you are trying to get a hand like a 9 or pocket 5s, pocket 8s to fold, right? Or a hand like a 3. We are not trying to get a king to fold, though. If he happens to have a king, he's going to call every time, or a 2. So we want to make sure we don't just like rip it all in for a whole pile, because whenever he does have one of those hands, we want to make sure we lose the minimum. So we're trying to get hands like a 9 or worse to fold here. And I think when most players take this line, they're going to have a whole lot of 9s and 3s. And if they have a whole lot of 9s and 3s, and you can make them fold almost that entire range, then I think raising big is quite strong. So Ottomar gives it some thought. Does he find a call? What do you think? Should he call here? One thing I will say is when you make these small bets, you must make sure your range is reasonably well protected. And a lot of people don't. I'm not saying Ottomar doesn't, but a lot of people in this scenario will almost entirely value bet small with very thin value hands and almost never with the nuts. And if you're never value betting tiny like this with the nuts, then if you're going to fold all the hands like 8s and 9-7 suited to a raise, then you're just going to be drastically overfolding. And in this scenario, what is Elio actually representing? Ooh, alarm's going off. Time for me to do something, apparently. What is Elio actually representing? He's representing a 2 or a king, but probably doesn't have a whole lot of kings. And he could have a 2. The thing is, like, what hands block the 2? And they're like, none of the cards really effectively block the 2, because Elio would check a lot of 2s in the big blind, right? So it's almost like your blockers are not so relevant in this scenario, I don't think. I'm trying to think, does having a heart matter? In this spot, Elio may bet flush draws on the flop, although maybe not, because when you're shallow, you have to be careful betting flush draws. So if you bet the flush draw and get jammed, you kind of have to fold, and that's not what you want at all. So this is one of these spots where you got to play poker. You got to play poker. This is what the old school players say. You find yourself in a spot and you got to play poker. You got to ask, does he have it? And if you are playing against someone who gets in there and sporadically battles, like I know Elio does, I'm not going to say this is definitively a call or anything, but, well, I might find a hero call here, even though it may be torching my money in the long run. Ottomar does fold, though. I certainly can't blame him. X-Vang shows the nuts, confirms Elio's bluffing, and Elio wins a nice pot. Congrats to them. Congrats to all these players for making the final table. It's always fun to make a deep run in a $10,000 buy-in tournament. Thanks to GG for letting us use this hand. Make sure you check them out at ggpoker.tv. If you enjoyed this video, do me a quick favor. Support the channel by clicking the like and subscribe buttons below. Also, click the notification bell. And if you really want to go deep and study poker a whole lot more, check out my training site, pokercoaching.com. You can get a free membership at pokercoaching.com/free. That's me for today. Good luck in your games. Have a great, great day. And I'll talk to you next time.